All right. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone has had a good week since I spoke to y'all last Thursday morning. Thank you again for joining this morning early. On that, I always appreciate people who are able to set aside, a little bit of time out of our busy days to listen to some information that we have to provide to you. Last week, we talked about just a general overview of the drug and alcohol testing requirements that apply to employers that have drivers who operate commercial motor vehicles where a CDL is required. So we went through everything from sort of soup to nuts, talked about the different elements of the program, different types of tests, what substances are being tested for, talked about the prohibitions, all those type of things on that. So, this week we're gonna drill down into one particular part of those regulations that talks about the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. And some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not, but I think after we go through it, you'll find that this is an additional tool that you have at your disposal to ensure that the drivers that you are hiring and putting behind the wheel of your trucks and going out on the job site, are the best drivers that you can find. Because, we all know that finding a good driver is difficult. Keeping good drivers is difficult. And so our goal as FMCSA is to provide some tools that'll help you as you make those employment decisions. So we're gonna, like I said, talk about the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse today. So our agenda is pretty straightforward. I'm gonna give you an overview of the clearinghouse, what it means. I'm gonna talk about registration. You have to register in order to be a user of the clearinghouse. I'm going to talk about how you use it, queries and consent requests. What do you have to do to query it? And do you have to get a, approval, or does the driver have to give you permission to query information about him? We can talk about what violations are reported to the clearinghouse, some common issues that everybody experiences, and then we get a few pages on some frequently asked questions, and then some next steps about this. So straightforward agenda. It's a lot in there. So hopefully you can take some notes and you can ask questions today, or again, follow up with me directly, or go through Christina. She has all my contact information, and you can feed her your questions, and she'll get them to me, and I'll answer her, and she can get them back to you. So what is the clearinghouse, the final rule? This was actually mandated by Congress. So it was a law, passed by Congress, signed by the president as part of MAP 21. And MAP 21 is a piece of legislation that authorizes different highway programs, that we have in our country. It was published December 5th, 2016. In that final rule, it established all the requirements. And then the implementation date was January 6, 2020. So it's been in effect now for over a year. This past January of 2021 was the 1-year anniversary. So now we're into the second year. So I did put the information down there on how you can find the clearinghouse final rule on our website, but it's probably easier just to go to the FMCSA.dot.gov website. In the search box, just type Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, and we have a number of specific pages that come up, web pages that will provide you all sorts of information and tools, in order to understand what you got to do and comply with what you got to do. But this is a mandate. It was statutorily required. Our regulations implemented it, and January 6th was the implementation date. So if you've not done anything with the clearinghouse, you're late. And so after this presentation, go to the different parts you need to and get yourself set up for the clearinghouse. Who's required to use the clearinghouse? Have a lot of different people required to use the clearinghouse. We're just going to talk about a couple of them today. We're going to focus mainly on drivers and then you all as the employer, but you can also see you have consortia, third-party administrators, medical review officers, substance abuse professionals, and our state driver's license agencies. So, in Virginia, the DMV is going to be an entity that's required to use it. So what do we really need to do? What is the clearinghouse? What's it all about? And I think we need to go back to realize that in the drug and alcohol regulations prior to the clearinghouse, there was a gap, and drivers took advantage of that gap. Some drivers did. And let me give you an example. Let's say I, come and apply for a job at Company A as a driver. Well, Company A has a drug and alcohol testing program for drivers. So they send me for a pre-employment drug test. In that case, well, I'm not hired yet by you because I've not passed all the things I need to do in order to become an employer or an employee of you. So I go to the drug test facility, and I get there and I decide, well, no, I'm not going to take that test, in that case, or I take the test and then that test is reported back to you as positive. Well, obviously you're probably not going to hire that individual. Since that driver was never an employee of yours with that positive test, you can't do anything with that information. You're restricted by the privacy laws of sharing that information with anyone. So let's say the same driver who tested positive then goes, waits a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, purges their system of whatever drug was in it, goes to apply for a job at a different employer. He is never, or she is never, going to tell them that that was a positive test. When he's asked, they're not going to divulge that. Since they were never employed by you because it was pre-employment, there's not going to be any past employment check, and you cannot share that information with anybody. So you have a driver that tested positive for an illegal drug, controlled substance, but since he was never employed anywhere, that information in the past just never made it anywhere. And drivers played that game all the time. They would go to all these different employers and they would never let any of them know what their past drug history use was. So you had potentially a driver who was a user of drugs, but was employed for the sheer reason that that information could not be shared anywhere. Well, now the field has changed. So now he goes for that pre-employment test, or she goes for that pre-employment test. It's positive. Well, again, it's going to be reported to you as the employer. You're most likely not going to hire that individual. But in this case, that positive test is going to be reported to the clearinghouse by the medical review officer. And so now there will be a record of that positive test, and that driver is prohibited from being a driver in a commercial motor vehicle until he goes and completes the return to duty test process. So now any employer who this driver applies a job for goes into the clearinghouse as part of their background checks on their applicants and sees that you have a positive test there. And now you can ask the driver, well, a positive test is there. What have you done? Have you done what is necessary to be eligible to drive again? So a driver can no longer cover up the fact that there was a positive test in their history. It is now reported to the clearinghouse. And not just the MROs are reporting it, you have other people reporting it, and we'll talk about that. So this helped close that gap that's been in existence forever, where that information about a positive test, could not be, or there was limited times where it could be shared. Now, also, we're putting, all positive tests in here. So not just pre-employment, but a positive test from randoms or from post-accidents or reasonable suspicion. All the different types of testing that are done. If there's a positive result, gets posted in here. So there is a record of it. And employers now have a tool they can go to see if that driver is qualified. So, much better than what we had. This was effective January 6th. So it's from that point forward, January 6th of 2020, not January 6th of 2019. So we're going, forward from that date. So it'll only be positive tests that are in there from January 6th, to current, not prior to that date. Nothing in the law made this retroactive. So just like you can see on the screen, we now have a record of it. Employers and medical review officers report these violations to the clearinghouse. It is a secure database that retains the violation. It's associated with the driver's CDL or CLP on there, and it will include his return to duty process. So it will tell you as an employer, is this driver eligible to return to duty? Have they completed the steps necessary to be able to return to duty? And it is going to give you, with driver's consent, a query option for employers and for third-party administrators who work on your behalf, for us as FMCSA and other enforcement officials, for state enforcement agencies out there. And then at any time, a driver can access only their own information. It is their information, and they can go into the clearinghouse anytime and access their information. So are you covered by the rule? The bottom line is if you're, as an employer, are subject to the FMCSA drug and alcohol testing regulations that are found in Part 382, then you are covered by this clearinghouse rule. So keep that in mind. And again, those requirements are: you as an employer operate trucks that require the driver to have a CDL on there. So if you fit that criteria, then the drug and alcohol clearinghouse rule applies, because it is part of 49 CFR Part 382. So pretty straightforward. So I do want to talk about some driver requirements. Most of my presentation is going to focus on the employer requirements, but obviously drivers have a role in here. So what we want you all to do as employers is be sure to, make sure your drivers understand this. But a driver, you need to register, okay, on there. So, and verify your CDL. And by registering, you're going to use your CDL. We're not using Social Security numbers. We're using that driver CDL. So, verify that your CDL is correct. Use that, to register, make sure all the information with your address and everything is correct on that CDL. Another thing a driver has to do when they register, employers are going to be sending out, consent requests. Because again, like I said, an employer has to get the driver's consent before you can query the clearinghouse. So a driver needs to respond to those full queries, requests from an employer on there, and we'll have a screenshot later on. It'll show what that looks like, but it's basically an employer requests a consent. The driver gets a notification, goes in and clicks a button that then gives that employer consent to check the record. And then a driver, if needed, they need to designate a SAP to record the return to duty. So what that means is that a driver is tested positive, that information is added to the clearinghouse. Part of the process is they are referred to a SAP, a substance abuse professional, and then they need to record who that SAP is, a driver does, in the record, because that SAP is the one who is going to be going in and putting the return to duty information in the record for that driver. So it can be shown that the driver completed whatever education, counseling, treatment, program that that was necessary. So that's sort of the driver requirements. Get registered, make sure you respond to consents. If needed, designate a SAP. Employer requirements are similar. So again, as an employer, you need to register in the clearinghouse too. Everybody has to register. And if you have a DOT number, you have the option of linking your FMCSA portal account to the clearinghouse. It's not required, but it just is another way to do it, where it would actually come up in your FMCSA portal account. You click on the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, but you do not have to do it that way. It's just a convenience if you want to. And then there are times when you are going to report CDL drug and alcohol program violations, some positive tests, refusals, actual knowledge. Those are the two areas that, or those are the areas that you are going to report on. Again, you're going to have to query it. And we're going to talk more about queries, but there's the pre-employment query we talked about, but then there's a requirement for you to do an annual query on all your drivers who are subject to the drug and alcohol regulations. And then the last step is if you use a consortium or third party, the CTPA, you need to designate in there who that entity is. You need, and you can, you get that information from them, and you go in, you actually specify who that entity is, because that CTPA is going to have the option of doing things on your behalf. You see those things like conduct the queries, report violations, the return to duty, all that information on your behalf, if you choose to allow them to do so on that. If you want to do it all yourself, then you don't need to designate. But most companies get a third-party administrator to assist them in their drug and alcohol compliance. So again, just like a driver, register, and you're going to be putting your information out of the company. Understand that you will be reporting certain things. You'll definitely be querying to see if there's information about your driver in the clearinghouse, and then the designation of the the CTPAs. So how do you register? I said there's two ways to do it, but everybody has to have a login.gov account. So you just go right to that login.gov, and it will bring you up where if you do not already have an account, and some of you might, but if you do not, then you create an account, no different than if you create an account for Amazon or somebody like that. You're actually going to create a logon.gov account on there, and this is the screen. Once you get in, create that account, you'll choose the clearinghouse, and you'll see this, and you'll just go through it, step by step. So you'll select your user role, and then you'll write on through. It's going to ask you to validate. And this is for a driver. A driver does the same thing. They have to have a logon.gov account. So they would do the same thing, whether it's employer or driver. But if you're a driver, it's then going to ask you, to add your commercial driver's license information on there. And again, that is required to do it. So make sure that that number is accurate, because what it does after you register, you're going to verify it, and it's going to reach out to your state driver's licensing agency, and it's going to make sure it's a match. So if you enter a character wrong, you include too many zeros or something like that, it's not going to verify that CDL on there. So make sure you're careful when you're filling it out. Hit that verify button. It'll reach out to the state where you're licensed, and it'll verify that yes, we do have a match. The person on record, at the DMV is the same person who is registering for the clearinghouse. Okay, so you might take a couple tries. It's not a perfectly user-friendly system. It's pretty straightforward. but sometimes a space or a hyphen can mess things up. So just go and if it doesn't verify the first way that you put it in, just try removing some of those spaces or hyphens, because those requirements are set by the state, and every state could be a little bit different on that. I do want to say that there is not an app for this. It's all done on the web. However, it does work well in the mobile environment. So, employers or drivers that have smartphones or a tablet or an iPad or something like that, there is not an app for it. You'll just directly go to the website and do everything, but it works well. It was built to it was built to work in that environment as well as just going to your desktop and logging in that way. So that's for drivers. For employers, like I said, you'll register, you'll get that logon .gov account set up. You'll specify your role as the employer, and then you have two paths to finish your registration. You can either, like I said, link your FMCSA portal account to it by USDOT number on there, or you can be a non-portal user. So it'll walk you through the steps when you start to register, and it will ask you whether or not you want to link it to your portal account. Now, it'll ask you about portal roles on that, and you all as the employer register you as the employer. You're sort of that overall administration person, but you then can designate assistants. And so what those are people that you have allowed as the employer to have access to the clearinghouse, so they can do different things that are necessary for you in your business when they deal with the clearinghouse. Okay. So, not only are you registered employer, but then you're going to go around and say, hey, these people who work for me, I also want to have them have access to the clearinghouse, too, on that, which most companies that I've run into have at least a couple people. You'll have a primary one and then a backup. Some companies have more, depending on the way that you structure it and who you believe needs to have access to this clearinghouse. Now, caution, obviously, and this is the obvious, but we do like to state it, only people who have a need to know about the drug and alcohol history of a driver should have access to the clearinghouse. So make sure it is restricted to only those, because it does have very sensitive information and Privacy Act requirements do apply, and it needs to only be used for the right purposes on there. So as you're thinking about who you want to have access to it, make sure their role in your business really does require them to have access to this type of information, and then that they can be trustworthy with that information.
Craig, we had one question come in. During the registration process, can you pause the or log back in and continue the registration process, or does it have to be done at one time?
Do it all at one time.
Okay.
Do it all at one time. Yeah, that's it doesn't take that long. If you have all the information, it'll take about 5 minutes to do. On here, it'll take you a lot less time to do than what I'm talking about it on here. So again, you need to designate a consortium or third-party administrator on here. It's going to ask you who it is. So and you'll start typing it in. You can hit search, because CTPAs register for the clearinghouse too. So your CTPA might be registered. It's going to come up in the search box in there, and it's going to pre-populate that information. But it's always a good idea to contact them prior to sending them that designation request on there. But by this time, we're pretty much the CTPAs who are involved in helping employers like yourselves manage their drug and alcohol testing program are registered in the clearinghouse. If they're not, it's probably because they're brand new in the business. But most of them Well, like I said, I don't know of one in Virginia that's not, and we deal with a lot of different CTPAs. They had, not only this whole past year to get registered, but even prior to the effective date of the clearinghouse, they had opportunity to get registered, before that. So they have. And then, like I said, CTPA must be registered. And then you are also going to select the actions that they're going to be able to take on your behalf. And I don't think this applies, to anyone in this group, but there is a category of employers called an owner operator. It's just basically a driver who owns their own truck, works for themselves on that. They have to designate a CTPA too. Owner operators must be in a consortium. There's not a requirement. An employer other than an owner operator has an option. Most are in a consortium and have TPAs assist. They don't have to be. They can do it all independently, but an owner operator must be in a consortium. So that's that's why it says there they must designate at least at least one CTPA. We talked about query requirements. So now you're registered in it. Your drivers are registered in it. What is the next step? Well, now the next step is the query part of it. Actually going in and using the clearinghouse to ensure that a CDL driver is not prohibited from performing a safety sensitive function, such as operating a CMV. And remember last week, if you remember, I talked about, we say safety sensitive functions because there are other duties that a CDL driver might do other than operating a CMV that are considered safety sensitive. So for instance, they might also do mechanical work on that CMV. If they are prohibited from performing a safety sensitive function because they have tested positive for alcohol or drugs, then they cannot do that either. They cannot work on that vehicle. You would need to assign them, if you choose to keep them as an employee, you need to assign them to a non-safety sensitive function. So, the easiest way I think to think about that for a driver is anything that he's doing away from the truck, is probably eligible. Anything he is doing with that truck is not eligible. So he's repairing it, he's setting something up in it, all those type of things. Obviously driving he cannot do. We do not want that positive driver around that CMV until they are eligible to do so on that. And again, we mentioned it that all queries require a driver consent. So there are two types of queries. A pre-employment query. So this is required for all newly hired drivers. So from January 6th of 2020 on, everybody should be doing a pre-employment query of the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. Now, the requirement to do a background check on a prospective driver is 3 years. Well, we don't have 3 years worth of data yet or information in the clearinghouse. We won't have that till January 5th of 2023 on that. So in this transition time, you're going to actually do two pre-employment type of queries. You're going to do the one in the clearinghouse, and then you're still going to send the request to prior employers and get that information and do your prior previous employer checks. Once January 5th, 2023 arrives, then you will not have to do that manual check. You can just do the pre-employment query through the clearinghouse. So remember that on there. We still, and that's just the timing of everything on that. So you have a pre-employment query on all newly hired CDL drivers since January 6th of 2020 on there. So if you have not done one on a driver that you've employed, go back and do it now. It's going to be late, but at least you did it, and you can always explain the fact that, hey, I wasn't aware of this, I didn't get registered in time, whatever the case might be, at least it's there. At least it's there, you've checked it. Now, the other type of query is the annual query, and it's every 12 months. And it's up to you to decide when the 12 months is. You should have done your first annual query, again, by January 5th of this year. If you missed it, go in and do it now. Get them done on that, and then get yourself set up on that rolling 12-month calendar. Some companies do it all on the same date. For a driver, some companies use their hire date. Some companies use a driver's birth date. It's sort of up to you to determine how you want to establish that, that 12-month, but once every 12 months on there. And again, all queries require driver consent. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But those are the two types of queries. The pre-employment query, so every time the driver comes to you, every time do that pre-employment query. And then the annual query for all drivers on your roll at the time of that query. Oops. There we go. Okay. Little bit additional requirements on the query. We're going to talk about consents. We have the annual query with the pre-employment and the pre-employment query. Okay, so what will you see? On a pre-employment query, it's going to be the full query. On there, it's going to be everything that is on that driver's record for the clearinghouse, whatever information is in there. And so on that one, you'll see in the lower right of that box, it says specific consent provided electronically within the clearinghouse. It's required for each full query of an individual driver on that. So what that means is you're going to send that, you're going to send a request through the clearinghouse. There'll be an electronic request through the clearinghouse that asks the driver permission so you can do the full query. And we'll have a couple screenshots that'll show you what I'm talking about there. So anytime you do a full query, which gives you access to all information in the clearinghouse, you have to do electronically. You have to get consent from the driver, and it's done electronically. So we said all pre-employment queries are full queries just by their nature. That's a requirement in the law. It's a full query, but there might be other times that you want to do a full query too. That's up to you. If that's the case, you have to have that consent. It's done electronically within the clearinghouse. Now, we have another type of query called a limited query. And what that does is that limited query will go to that driver's record, and it will inform you that there is additional information about this driver. It's not going to give you full access to that information. It is just going to tell you, yes, there is a record for this driver. There is information about this driver. So in that case, all annual queries have to have at least the limited query type. So you're rolling 12 months, you have to do a limited query. Now you can do a full query if you decide to do so, but again, every full query requires consent from the driver electronically through the clearinghouse. On a limited query, all you need is general consent, and that can be done outside the clearinghouse. You can do it electronically or a wet signature. It can be one time or unlimited. So you can get a form, and on our website, we have a form for limited query. You can get that, fill it out, have the driver sign it. It might have a range in there that says a time range that says effective from the date the driver signed it through the time that he's employed with you. Or it might have a limited time in it, or it might just be that one time. That's up to you to decide as an employer for these limited queries what you want to do. So you keep that on file. It could be an email that you send to a driver, and then you keep that record, and that is your permission to do these limited queries. So you are not asking for a query within the electronically within the clearinghouse for a limited query. You're just getting that permission from the driver in some other format outside of the clearinghouse to do that limited query on an annual basis. Okay. Now, over on, and you can see, you can go to our website and download the general consent form. Now, if a driver refuses consent for any type of query, you cannot conduct it. Okay. So it's not like you can go in there anyway and do it. You cannot conduct it. However, that driver is prohibited from performing a safety sensitive function for you as the employer. So you cannot use that individual as a driver. This is not an optional thing for you. It's not an optional thing for a driver. So if they don't want to do it, that's their choice, but they can't work for you at that point. Or they can't perform safety sensitive functions. If you decide that you want to use them in some other capacity, that's fine, but not as a driver. You cannot use them as a driver without that query. So make sure they understand that. You should have probably some language on your application that talks about that. So get with your HR people, your attorney, whoever, make sure that whatever language that you use is legally sufficient, just to let the driver know that, hey, without this query, they cannot they cannot work for you as a driver, whether that's a limited or an annual. Okay, so on a query result, like I said, when you do it, you're gonna go in and you're going to see a screen like this. Result, driver not prohibited. It's going to give you that box you see on the left, little green circle with a check mark in it. That means that there's not anything in this clearinghouse that would suggest that driver is prohibited from driving. On the opposite, you'll might get something that says that query your limited query is complete. However, a record was found and a full query is needed. So right at that point, it's going to allow you to click that button and said send consent request, because again, all full queries, the consent must be done electronically through the clearinghouse. So you're going to send that request. The driver is going to get notified. They'll go into the record and they'll either agree to that consent request or deny it. If they deny it, then it's over at that point. You cannot use that driver. You cannot employ that driver at that point. If if he agrees to it, you can go in and you can see what that full record is, and it will show if there's a record. It'll show that there was a positive test, but hopefully it shows that the driver has completed the return to duty process, and you as a prospective employer can hire that driver in there. But it's going to give you that information when you send that consent request. The driver agrees to it, and you're going to go and see that full record. So on a limited query, that's what's going to come back. One of those two types of answers. Again, a driver has to respond. So they've registered in the clearinghouse themselves. They're going to get this email that basically says, hey, there's a request for a consent request. They go in and they either click I consent or I do not consent on there. And then also, for them, just on the right, this is like a driver dashboard, and it's going to show them if there's any violations, reported about that driver on there. Most likely they know about it if there is, but we do have to know that a driver, sometimes inaccurate information can get reported, and the driver needs to know about it if there's a way to get it corrected. So driver hopefully will give you consent on that. So on a full query now, This is the information you'll see when you submit a full query on that. So it's sort of going to just summarize what you've done. It's going to give you the query result, driver, prohibited, on there. So that's the information you're going to be getting back. It's just a sample. So when you hit view query details, you're going to get all this information. You're going to see down at the bottom the violation information on there. What was the violation? In this case, refusal. What was the reason for the test? There's a random test, and the type of test failed to appear on that. So it's going to summarize that information for you, so you know the specifics of what that violation was. And the driver, he's got the same view on here. It's just it's from his perspective on that, and it's going to show him that information. So again, there's as long as everything's done right, this information's there. It's kept private, except by those who need it, and a driver can always get access to their information. So reporting of violations. Who reports what on here? We have a clearinghouse, but unless people report the violations as required, then it doesn't do anybody that good. So what has to be reported? Any alcohol test with a confirmation test 0.04 or higher blood alcohol, because that's positive, or refusal to test. And we're talking about refusals a little bit. A refusal for drug or alcohol on there. Actual knowledge. So you as a motor carrier, what is actual knowledge? And we'll go and talk about that. You have to report that. Negative return to duty tests are there, and then whatever follow-up testing the SAP is prescribed, each of those tests are put in there. So that is what is, reported. So what is actual knowledge? Again, this is one of these things that you as a employer are going to report. You're not reporting that positive test that is done through the drug screen. That is being done by your MRO. You're not reporting the return to duty. That's being done by your CTPA. Follow-up testing is being done by your SAP. Alcohol confirmation tests are being done by those entities that do the breath test. But the actual knowledge is what you're reporting on that. So what is actual knowledge? And it is an employer's direct observation of an employee. So it's got to be direct. It's information provided by the driver's previous employer. It's a traffic citation for driving a CMV while under the influence of alcohol or controlled substances, or it's an employee's admission of alcohol or controlled substance use except as provided in section 383.21 on there. And 383.21 basically says that, if an employee comes to you as the employer ahead of time and admits that they have an addiction problem, at that point, you cannot use them as a driver, but then they are protected. They are protected at that point under the law. So our regulations recognize that on that. But did we have?
We do have a question, yes, sir. The question was referring to the accountability of businesses to log in and become a part of this clearinghouse. Are there consequences of not signing up or not being a part of the clearinghouse? And then who verifies and checks for the businesses?
Yes, it is a requirement under the law to be, if you're subject, if you as an employer are subject to drug and alcohol question or regulations, it's a requirement that you register for the clearinghouse. It's now part of the drug and alcohol program requirements. So, and FMCSA validates it, and there is a consequence, to an employer. It could be some kind of formal action like a fine. It could be some kind of other intervention that we're going to require you to show us proof of your registration, proof that you're using it. those type of things there. So FMCSA is the oversight on that, and there is a consequence. Now, I think in saying that, I think the one thing as an employer you need to be cognizant of is if your driver goes out and gets in a crash and there is an injury or, heaven forbid, a fatality, well, at that point there is most likely going to be litigation on that. Civil at the minimum. I mean, there might be criminal depending on the situation, but civil litigation is probably going to happen. I can guarantee you that the attorney representing the other parties is going to know that you as an employer should have been in this clearinghouse and you should have a compliant drug and alcohol program. If you don't, they're going to use that against you and they're going to win. No doubt about it. Even if your driver was not intoxicated or under the influence at the time of that crash, they're going to spin it to say, look at you as an employer. You're not even following the most basic of safety requirements. Drug and alcohol testing has been around since 1989. The clearinghouse is newer, but there's been knowledge about it since 2016, and you still failed to act. So they're going to spin that to make their case that you all are at fault in this thing, or at least negligent in some type. So I think you need to remember that too. Yes, it's a requirement of the law. There is, from our standpoint as FMCSA, as the regulatory agency, there's a consequence. It most likely is going to include a significant fine, and part of that settlement or adjudication is going to be proof that you have now registered in there. But from outside of that part of it, I think there is that chance here that as if something does go wrong, there could be some litigation there. And then the third part of this is we're doing these things for safety. You guys are operate safe companies on the job site, people going back and forth. You don't want anything to happen. The last thing you want is a driver who is an addict, is using. You don't want that person employed by you, because that's just going to create problems. So it's also the right thing to do, because we are talking about safety on here, and again, this is a tool that we want in your hands, so you can make those best decisions. So actual knowledge, again, if any of those 4 bullets occur, then since you're registered, you're going to go and report those things in the clearinghouse. So you see a driver using drugs or alcohol, that's your direct observation, actual knowledge. A past employer, hopefully they put the information in the clearinghouse. It may not be though, but if you reach out to a past employer, they say, yeah, the reason we let go of this driver is because they tested positive for marijuana. You don't see that record in there in the clearinghouse, so you're going to add that based on the previous employer. Driver gets pulled over, issued a citation while they're operating your truck, while they're operating a CMV for being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. They should report that to you. You'll find out about it some way. You put those in there, and then their admission of it. And so again, there are some provisions, for some protections under the law. But if they admit it to you, then you go ahead and report that. A verified positive drug test does not qualify as actual knowledge on there. So you get the test result back from your MRO. It says positive. That's not actual knowledge. They will report it on there. The MRO will report it, not you. On those verified positive drug test results. And then there's some documentation that you'll need to upload regarding actual knowledge. So just be mindful of that. You'll get that information in the system too. Reporting violations, we'll see, this is the MRO. They'll report anything dealing with that drug test, whether it's verified positive, whether it's adulterated or substituted. They'll report the refusal to test as determined by the MRO. A driver goes to the testing site and begins the testing process, and then walks out, refuses to do so. Well, that's a positive. Refusals are treated as positive, on that. And so the MRO will report that because the collection site will report that to the MRO on that. And then changes to a verified, drug test. The MRO reports that. They have a role in this too. Your SAP, if the test is positive, the SAP, substance use professional, is going to report, he's going to identify the driver and the date of their initial assessment. Remember, you referring to a SAP. So the SAP has to then, do the assessment, and then, has to determine the treatment program, education program, and then make that determination on when is this driver eligible for return to duty. And you can see the timeframes on the right. So everything's done within a couple days on that. So information does not lag. What are some FAQs that we see? So will violations that occur prior to January 6, 2020 be entered? No, they won't. We talked about it earlier. It's not retroactive. So how long is that violation in there? 5 years or until the follow-up testing plan is completed, whichever is later. Sometimes, as you know, follow-up testing, it could, it could go on for a while. And so that information will be in the clearinghouse for a minimum of that 5 years there. So it's in there for a while. Can an MRO or employer report a drug and alcohol program violation if the driver is not registered? Yes, you can, because you're going to associate that violation with the driver's CDL. So even if they've not registered, and we want all drivers to be registered, we're encouraging you as employers, we're encouraging all drivers to get registered, but you as the employer can still, submit information. The MRO can submit information because you're going to have that driver's CDL and it's attached to that CDL. So I said earlier that sometimes, a mistake is made. Not very often, hopefully never, but, sometimes a mistake is made. So a driver could, check their record and see that there's an inaccuracy or think it's inaccurate. So they can, they can challenge it, on that. And there's the type of information that they can challenge, the accuracy of the information reported on there. They can, if you put actual knowledge that they received a traffic citation driving a CMV on there, they can challenge that on that, or the accuracy of the test. But that last one, excuse me, I misspoke. The accuracy of the test results and refusals may not be challenged. So, if they're saying, hey, that test result was wrong on there, blah, blah, well, no, that can't be challenged. It's a very scientific, method of analyzing that specimen. So they cannot challenge that, but they can challenge some other things in there. And they do that through our data queue system, which is a system FMCSA has created to allow, to allow entities to challenge information that we have in there. It's an electronic system, and they can, go into our data queue system. They can find it on our website, and they can submit that petition to FMCSA with the reasons and the evidence they need to remove that, that they think the inaccurate data should be removed. FMCSA will then take a look at that and make a final determination, and then post that decision. The return to duty process is not changed, so nothing in this has changed the return to duty process on that. The driver, we talked about earlier, drivers, if they test positive, have to designate a qualified SAP. The SAP will do the assessment. The employee will complete the assessment. The SAP will enter that information about the driver's treatment in the clearinghouse. Once that, that assessment and that treatment is completed, the driver will need to take a return to duty test, and those tests are recorded in the clearinghouse by the CTPA also. So will that testing plan be available in the clearinghouse to you as the employer? No, the entire plan won't be in there. So you don't get to see what the driver and the SAP talk about what that plan is. What you will see is, whether or not one is there and has it been completed. It's private, between, the individual and their SAP about what that treatment is, but you as the employer need to know that it has been completed and the driver is now eligible to return. And that's what you'll see in there. In addition, you'll be able to see that, yes, there is one. So what are some common issues that we see? Sometimes an employer will register as a CTPA, on that. So, that is a, that is something that you've just, chosen the wrong role. You need to make sure your role as an employer, because the query plans we talk about, there's a cost to those query plans, and a CTPA cannot purchase it. Only employers can purchase it. Sometimes an employer registers as an assistant, not as the administrator. So again, make sure not only do you choose the employer role, but you have that admin role. Once you do that, then you can set up, and invite assistants. And then sometimes employers misregister and they register themselves as a driver on that. So just be aware of that. Make sure you follow those instructions. It's pretty straightforward, but we do see some of these issues with registration. What are the common issues on there? For the CDL, make sure it is in there, or make sure it's updated, at every time. So you'll have that, box right there on your employer profile. You can add the CDL number, right in there. Common issues, multiple roles, current role drop-down box to switch between roles. So there's different roles on there. Make sure you choose the right role when you're in your dashboard on what you want to do. And then you as the employer must be set in the DACH motor carrier admin role again, to be able to manage your CTPAs, your users, to be able to go in and update your profile with information, all that type of thing. So make sure that if you're doing things like that, sort of these management type of functions, that you're set as that DACH, Drug Alcohol Clearinghouse Motor Carrier Admin role. They'll give you those rights to do those type of things. Logon.gov, just to show you a few common issues there. On that, you see, make sure the email's right, the phone number's right. Just follow the instructions on there. It does have that two-factor authentication. So it is going to send you, a text message, something like that, give you a code that says, hey, add this to it, sort of that two-factor authentication, just like you see in a lot of other websites that you register for. There, just that extra layer of security. So in this case, the two-factor authentication, though, is a requirement. I know sometimes it's not a requirement with certain places I'm registered with. You can choose to two-factor or not. This one, it's a requirement, to do so. So what are some common issues for the violations? A driver cannot view or query any violations. So, need to verify that the MRO or employer reported it. Sometimes it's that simple. If they can't do it, maybe something's wrong with their CDL that was entered for the driver. So go back and check that, make sure that's entered properly. And then the driver needs to verify his registration included his CDL information. Sometimes they leave it out, or they, like I said earlier, they don't put it in right. So they need to make sure that's right. And then if they can't, designate a SAP, because remember, a driver, once they test positive for drugs or alcohol, they have to designate a SAP. Got to make sure the violation is reported. No SAP is needed if there's not a violation. And then again, they got to verify that the correct CDL information was entered for the driver. The SAP has to be registered, just like a driver does, an employer does, an MRO does, the CTPA does, the SAP does. If a SAP is not registered, then a driver cannot designate the SAP. So drivers need to make sure, that SAPs are registered. And then the last one, make sure that the SAP's name's entered correctly. So just some common issues. Now, I mentioned about the queries. We talked about them. There is a cost to queries on here. You can do one annual payment and have that's good for 12 months. It costs $24,500, and you can do as many queries, limited or full, as you want. Now, obviously, for that one, that's recommended for high volume users. I don't know if anybody on this call, has that, but think about that. There are motor carriers out there that employ 15 and 20 and 30,000 drivers. Think about UPS, the package people, they have 50,000 plus drivers on that. So they are doing, thousands of queries a year. So in their case, they're going to buy that, buy that unlimited query plan. But most employers are just doing the individual query plan. It is a $1.25 flat rate per query for limited or full. There's no difference in there. You can bundle them to meet your business needs. So you can buy, let's say you think you're going to do, 10 in a year. So you can buy 10 at one time, or you can buy them individually each at one time. And then they never expire. If you buy a batch of 20, let's say, but you only use 10 in that first year, well, then those other 10 are still there. They don't expire on that. And then you have the ability to go and add to it. If you bought 10, but you say, well, I need 20 now, you can just go and add 10 more, to it and do it that way. If you start out doing a limited query and that record shows that there is a full record, like we talked about, then you do not pay an additional $1.25 on that, because now you have to do a full query because the limited said there's additional information you need to go in and check, but you don't pay $1.25 again. Since you've already made that query, you just stick with that. Just some additional FAQs. Why purchase one on that? Because there is a fee. And then you as an employer, if you're going to have your CTPA do the queries on your behalf, they cannot purchase queries, only you can. And then you've designated them as your CTPA, you've given them the role to do queries, they can go in and do them, but they cannot purchase a query plan themselves, only the employers. And right there, it'll walk you through on how to purchase queries from the clearinghouse. And then there is a job aid we have on our DACH website on how to purchase queries. So which plan's right for you, that's up to you. Like I said, we talked about the bundles individually queries, or the high volume users that can do the unlimited query. That's your decision as an employer based upon your number of employees. So sometimes you have a driver who comes to you and they've worked for another employer that has a required drug and alcohol testing program. Will that violation history from that other mode be there? Let's say they worked as a railroad employee who was subject to testing. Will that be in there? The answer is no. This only applies to employers subject to the testing requirements under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulation requirements. So only those that work for motor carriers. Will every driver need to register? The answer is no. We encourage all drivers to register regardless, and you should encourage your drivers to do so. However, not every driver is required to do so. A driver will only need to register if they need to provide consent to the employer in the clearinghouse for pre-employment or full queries. So if you had drivers that you employed prior to January 6th of last year, and they're still and they're still there working, and they have never tested positive, they never incur a drug and alcohol violation, they do not need to be registered on that. They don't need to be registered. Now, if you're going to do a full query on them, they do need to be registered. And then, like I said, all pre-employment, so new drivers, all pre-employment are full queries. So we're encouraging drivers to get registered regardless. But the bottom line is, you might have drivers been with you for years and years. They've never left you as an employer. They don't have a drug and alcohol violation. They're never seeking other employment. They do not need to register in there, okay, unless there is a reason for them to register. So, and can you as an employer register your drivers? No, they need to register themselves because again, they have to complete that process. So you might help them do it, but they have to log in, create their own ID, all that kind of stuff on here. How about non-CDL drivers who operate CMVs? No, only those employers who are subject part 383 and 383, only those. Okay. And will the driver or will the employer be notified if a new violation is recorded on a previously queried driver? So there is a 30-day look back. So the answer is yes on that. So there's a 30-day look back. Will the employer receive notification of new violation within 30 days of all completed queries? No, you will not after you complete that limited query or that ad hoc. Can you designate more than one CTPA? Yes, you might have a couple out there. That's not usual, but you might on that. And then who will record positive tests for an owner operator? We talked about owner operator as sort of a special condition. That's where the CTPA has a bigger role that I don't think applies in this case. We talked about that the actual plan will not be there. Just the results of the plan, and will follow-up tests to be tracked, in the clearinghouse. No, the SAP might prescribe the follow-up plan. It won't be tracked in there unless a positive test result for one of those follow-up tests is done. Then it's got to be reported as a new violation. And then this thing starts all over again. The whole return to duty process starts all over again. Because your SAP could say, hey, I want this driver to be tested once a month under follow-up. We're not going to require that all those test results go in there. That's between the SAP and the driver. But if that one of those follow-up tests is positive, then that is reported in there because you do have a positive test. So again, you can do bulk queries rather than one by one. There's a way to do that. So you can read up on that. So let's say you're going to do, all your queries at one time rather than, you'll fill out, one way to do it and you'll upload that file and it'll give you those results. You'll be able to submit them in bulk rather than individually. I talked about how it is mobile friendly, but they don't have access to computer. So they'll be able to access it, through a smartphone if that's their, if that's their desire. And again, we're not using social security number in there, it is that CDL number. And also on the chain of custody form, the driver's CDL number is entered in lieu of the driver's social security number. And there is a lot of material on our website about the clearinghouse. Please refer to it. It'll be updated. You can get a subscription to it, and you can see all sorts of information emailed to you on a regular basis. I think by last count, there was over 50,000 drivers listed in the clearinghouse with a record. So, that's a significant amount, and that number is growing. Every month we run it, that number increases significantly in the clearinghouse. So make sure you are registered and check it. You have my information, right here, how to get in touch with us. You can send us an email. We've got our phone. We have a clearinghouse team. If you're having a problem getting registered or something like that, you need somebody to help you, give you advice, you can send an email or call, and it'll get you in touch with somebody. And we have a whole learning center with all sorts of information. Refer to that, and hopefully everything will be at your fingertips you need. But that's the end of my presentation, Christina. So I very much, I appreciate you staying. I know I ran over about 10 minutes. I apologize for that, but there's just a lot of information in here. So again, thank you for your time and your patience. And if you have questions, please send them or give them to Christina and we'll get you answers.